equal roots. So how do you do that with the discriminant for equal roots? How do you guarantee that there's going to be equal roots when you solve an equation? Not in this case. It still has to do with the discriminant. Yes. So one solution, meaning they're the same, equal roots. How do you get that out of the discriminant?
K equals U.
The discriminant's got to equal 0. Okay, so that means this is what I'm thinking of in order to make that happen. So let's find the discriminant here. It's going to be 64 minus 4 times 2 times k, and I have to be equal to 0 in order for this to be equal roots. So the value I could solve for, 64 equals 8k. So this has the value k equals 8, and that means I'll have equal roots. Okay, so see if you can figure out how to find the values of k in here that will give us equal roots by working backwards with the discriminant. Okay, so these are the values you should end up with if you've got equal roots. Okay, so distinct roots. This time we need to make sure that k is greater than 0 if they're going to be distinct. This means I'm going to be looking for a value that guarantees it's greater than 0. So you do have some more freedom here. In this case, I could say 16 minus 4 times negative 2 k greater than 0. And that means I'll have 16 plus 8k has to be greater than 0. So if I solve this, that means k has to be greater than negative 2 in order for this to work. Okay, so your answers in this form are going to be an inequality. So anytime k is greater than negative 2, there are two distinct roots for this. And again here, this would be 9 minus 4 times 1 times k. So 9 minus 4k greater than 0. Be careful with the inequalities. 4k greater than negative 9. So that means k will be less than 9 over 4 after I divide. let's pass off on those next two, but they would be the same procedure as far as finding it for when it's greater than 0, but we'll do two more here to find imaginary roots. So imaginary roots, that means you got to make sure k is less than 0. So I'd have 64 minus 4ac, which means 64 plus 4k has to be negative. So k has to be less than negative 16 in order to make sure those roots are imaginary. This time I'm going to move on to this one. I'll try this last one here. So to make sure that I have imaginary roots, I have to make sure that 36 minus 4k times negative 2 is less than 0. So that means 36 plus 8k has to be less than 0. And that means 8k will be less than negative 36. So k has to be less than negative 4.5. Okay, so just to show you one example of where the discriminant might actually come in handy. Again, it has to do with existence. If you're ever wondering, maybe you've tried something, tried to do something and it's not working, it may be time to ask yourself if it's even possible. So for example, this problem sounds simple enough, but unless you want to torture somebody in your family and make them, go out and do this, or you say, here, I'll give you $100 if you can do this, and watch them goof around in the yard for a few hours. A farmer has 50 meters of fence left over from another corral he built. He estimates that he needs 350 meters squared to enclose his livestock, and will use his barn for one side. Does he have enough fencing to build the enclosure? So if we just draw a little picture here, he's got a barn, and he's going to make one more enclosure where the barn is part of it. And what we'd like is we'd like 350 meters squared here. And we've got 50 meters of fence to do it. So is this possible before we send somebody out and actually go get them do it? We've done these before, so if we call this side x, and we call this side x, that means we've got 50 minus 2x left here. So the area is going to be equal to x times 50 minus 2x. So this is the function that I get for area. And we want this to be equal to 350. So we have to solve this equation here. Basically, this is what we're saying is, can you solve this equation? That's what the person's going to do with 50 meters of fence. So to solve this equation, they'd have to do this. Right? And now let's be honest, most people, to build a garden fence, they're not going to pull out their calculators and do some math. 99.99% of people are just going to take the fence and start trying it, I guess, and check. But if we actually find the discriminant here, b squared is 2500 minus 4 times a times c, then we end up with negative 300 so it's very close, but it's not going to work. We're not going to end up with a fence that can do this. It's not possible to do it under these conditions. So because that discriminant is negative, we can say there's no solution. You'll be out in that garden for hours. You won't come up with it. you'll have to make some compromise. Like maybe you'll say, well, let's do 320 or something else, but you'll have to cut back on the area. It's not possible.